Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history we are likely to ignore. And with me as always is my co-host, Crystal Newton, business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Saddle up for a wild ride through today's most important news. Okay, well, welcome back here to 775 Alive. We're continuing sort of our exploration of some of these larger political issues, and we're so happy to be joined today from the United Kingdom with Metin Pekin, who is the author of a book called Breaking Democracy's Chains about getting rid of political parties. So thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure, and thank you for having me, Scott and Crystal. Honored to be here.
Huh?
We went global.
We went global, yes. Right?
Indeed.
Well, it's an interesting connection. I'd like you to give a bit of background, but one of the things for a lot of my the friends out here in the 775 is, of course, you're big in the beef industry there in Great Britain. So give us a bit of your background here and how you came to write Breaking Democracy's Chains, and then we can get into it.
From background, my family has been into American diners. It was called Zippy in olden days, with the milkshakes and whatever, before McDonald's became so popular over here. So I've always been in the burger business, and I went into manufacturing of the burgers, but I've been to other businesses as well. So we are now one of the leading, if not the leading, burger supplier throughout the UK. And before Brexit, we were sending product over to Europe as well, quite a bit. The Breaking Democracy's Chains. Well, this will be an interesting conversation, I think. First of all, you're running for office, both of you, so congratulations. It takes courage to put your name forward to do these things. And at the moment, I think, I have observed that people have lost faith in politics quite a bit. A lot of people are politically homeless. And the problem is, you vote red, you get purple. You vote blue, you still get purple. especially when the policies that matter to the people. So let's take one of the hot topics now, the wars. We are in war with Iran. That has so much consequences for the ordinary people, not just at the gas pumps, not just price of the gasoline, but that feeds into everything. And consumers end up paying more for groceries, more for transport, more for this, more for their flights, more for their holidays. So it's crazy how sometimes the consequences of these actions, sometimes they're necessary. Don't get me wrong. I'm not criticizing action itself, but oftentimes the consequences of these actions are either not thought about or they just ignored, like in case of Iraq war, Syria problems, Guatemala. There's so many consequences from these actions that affect ordinary people, you and I, and that's all boils down to the parties, because as I've said, when it comes to key policies, I'm afraid there's not a lot of daylight between the reds and the blues.
Mm-hmm.
Now, austerity. If you take austerity or 2008 bank crashes, banks were the guilty parties. They've crushed economies, subprime mortgages and whatever it is. What had happened? 700 billion of tax dollars were used to save banks. And people were lectured to tighten their belts, to be responsible, to close the deficit. Whereas the big banks were saved, and they are allowed to do what they want to do. So this is what led me to write Breaking Democracy's Chains, because I think democracy had been hollowed out over the years. I mean, if you go back to the founding fathers, they almost exclusively, every one of them was against factions and political parties. Now we identify with parties. There's a great book by Liliana Mason that explains how parties had fused cultural identities with the political identity and created these two mega identities, especially in the United States. And each side sees the other as existential threat. Now, I want to get a message across to say, well, I don't blame you. I understand, given all the media narratives, given all the sensitive cultural problems like immigration and so on and so forth, understand how you feel. But look, take a step back. Whether you're a Democrat, whether you're a Republican, take a step back and look at what the American founding fathers had said. I think it was John Adams that said, I dread division of the republic into two great parties. I mean, these were prophecies. This was 250 years ago. They were predicting what's happening today. I think George Washington warned that political parties could enable cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men to subvert the people's will. And that's what we're seeing today. Thomas Jefferson, I think he's famous for saying parties are the bane of the Republican government. Bane of Republic. And I think he's also, he has also said, if I could not go to heaven but with a party, I'd rather not go there at all.
Well, and one of the things, because I think you hit a key point to this, and one of the things I appreciated about the book, reading it through, was an emphasis and discussion, of course, on James Madison's Federalist Number 10. So when I used to teach the Intro to U.S. History at the college level, I mean, I used that. I would argue it's probably the most important of the Federalist Papers. But he addresses specifically this issue of faction and party, and I think that's one definition we might need to start with.
Sure.
First of all, is there a distinction between faction and party? And what is it about parties, right, as distinct from factions, that are problematic?
Yeah, no, the excellent question there. In Federalist Number 10, James Madison argued that factions were inevitable. A group of people that want the best for themselves. But organized factions, it was dangerous if they capture the government. So these organized groups and factions were a danger if they capture the government. His solution was to dilute their power through large and diverse republic. But we are evaluating this with the hindsight, with the benefit of hindsight here. 250 years ago, they did not experience what we've experienced in last 250 years. On top of that, let's compare the two eras. 250 years ago, there was no television, no radio, no internet, not even newspapers. So parties were necessity. They were a necessity. Whereas this day and age, information is abundantly available through multi-channels everywhere. Communication is instant. So we live in a very different era. We don't need these institutions that are not in Constitution, that are not part of democracy, but they weren't born out of philosophical brilliance. They came into the equation as a necessity for low information era. And they have monopolized the representation. So the problem is this. We've started off by saying people feel politically homeless. And that's for this reason, because there isn't that many people. If I was to put a question to you and Crystal and say, Crystal, do you identify or do you stand behind every single policy of the Republican Party? And she'll probably say, well, not everything, 80% of it, 90% of it, 50% of it. And likewise to the Democrats, if you say to a Democratic voter, do you stand behind everything that this party stands for? And again, they will say, well, no, not everything. Obviously not everything. I disagree with X, Y, and Z kind of a thing. So the political choice, the representation choice, has been curated and has been narrowed down. I mean, you've recently seen one of the representatives, is it Thomas
Massey.
Massey, being primaried out, somebody else came in. Now, primaries came in to reduce the influence of the party bosses, but yet it's increased the influence of money in politics. But the point is this: we have got a curated menu when we come to choose our representatives. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, okay, let's say, use a parallel, use an analogy. If I want to invite you guys for a dinner, I will ask you what kind of a food you like: Japanese, Chinese, Indian, Korean, whatever it is, Mexican, American. And then when we end up in a restaurant, when we turn up at the restaurant, we will have a full menu to select from. We'll choose the food that we want from that cuisine. When it comes to the representatives, it's more like a corporate dinner. You've got two choices of the main course, and that's it. You've got Republican or a Democrat candidate. There might be 9 of them, but ultimately they're the variation of the same thing. You know, there might be 3 candidates from, I don't know, Republicans to choose from at primaries, or 5, but you're still ending up choosing from a curated menu. But the problem with that is not democratic, because we haven't got a full choice. Who controls these candidates? Before we even get to the ballot box, we've got a list who say, well, you've got option A and an option B, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Well, that's not a full democratic choice. And this is what I try to explain and put across in Breaking Democracy Chains, that we're not stuck with this system. Political parties are not integral part of democracy or the Constitution. So
yeah, and I know Crystal's got a question, but can I just touch on the Massey issue? Because, of course, when we're recording it just last night, of course, John Cronin lost a race to Ken Paxton in Texas. And it's interesting to think about it, because in terms of political parties, Massey has always been sort of a thorn within the Republican establishment side. He's always been independent. He's never gone along with the party, which seems to back up to the point the party got rid of him. But then you have Cronin, who is probably a stereotypical example of the guy following the straight party line. And he was gotten rid of as well, right? And you're right that money's playing a role, but it seems to be party is separated from that, as opposed to opposing President Trump, right? So you have an internal party spat that's being played out that doesn't, I would argue, doesn't align directly with this issue that parties are the problem. I don't know if you've looked at any of the Cronin results yet, right? You might not have even gotten them over there, but it was sort of surprising thing that Massey and Cronin, outside of not liking Trump, don't really share a lot politically.
Yeah. Crystal, were you going to come in, or shall I try to deal with this point?
Oh yeah, no, I have a different track to turn to.
Okay, let's let's deal with this. I'm not familiar with this latest case, but the point I would make is a broader one. The problem is when if we go back to the founding fathers and listen to what they warned us against, is that political parties will divide the nation and will subvert people's will. So if we come back to that, there is internal party politics, and it depends who gets on with whom and who's got whose sport and so on and so forth. And when it comes to primaries, the turnout is diabolical. 20%, in some cases, 15%.
Yeah.
So these are the more active voters that come in, and some of them are close primaries. So without getting lost in the detail, the question is, a more broad question is, why couldn't our representatives stand as independent? I mean, it's maybe worth just explaining how we could put an alternative structure in place of political parties, and then the conversation might make more sense. So, step one, let's have 435 representatives elected first, without a party label, without a party banner. Once we've got those representatives, we'll come into how we can select the candidates and so on and so forth. But so that your viewers get the idea, first 435 representatives. Then we choose our national leader, candidates for the president. Anybody who qualifies under the Constitution puts their name forward and try to get backing from our representatives. So if they can get a certain number, say 20, 10, 30, whatever the number is, they will be in the race. They'll become a serious contender. They've got enough backing and support from our representatives that represent us. Now, through round of debates and voting, public debates and voting, our representatives narrow the list down to 2 finalist candidates for the presidency. Those 2 finalists, then at stage 3, will go to the public in a national election with their running mates. The winning ticket becomes the president and forms the executive. The runner-up becomes the minority leader. So we've got the structure, we've got independent MPs, we call them members of parliament MPs, you call them representatives. So we've got 435 representatives independent. We've got an executive, and we've also got publicly mandated opposition leader that can also set up a shadow cabinet and advise on policies and issues and put alternative forwards and scrutinize the executive on an ongoing basis. Then our representatives can make their mind up in the best interest of their voters, of their constituency, and with their conscience, without the party whip, without the party pressure. Because as you've mentioned, Thomas Massie may have not towed the party line. But if you don't do that, goodbye to you, my friend. You're no longer needed in this party. We had it with Boris Johnson. 21 of our representatives had voted against Brexit, not in line with Conservative Party. He withdrew the whip from them and pretty much ended their career. And some of them were veterans. They've been there all their lives. So party domination and control is no longer democratic. We are basically in a situation where the founding fathers had warned us about this situation 250 years ago. They must be turning in their grave, seeing what we are going through politically at the moment. But we can change that. There is an alternative structure That's why we don't need political parties. So debating parties really is not much relevant if we think parties are the problem. But parties are serving no good purpose, no good reason in the democracy as we see it today, because they have inserted themselves between the voters and the representatives, because we cannot punish them. Now, you might say, well, yes, we can punish them. Well, no, really, realistically, we cannot punish them, because if I'm a Republican and I want to punish my party and not vote for them, what am I doing? I'm letting the Democrats in. So I'm having to put up and say, well, mine might be not as good, not as bad, but the alternative is even worse. So we're not really choosing who best represents us. We're choosing lesser of two evils, and we're saying, well, let's keep the other guys out because they are, in our views, existential threat to us. Right. So that's the point I want to make regarding the parties. Sorry, I can go on and on and on. So, Crystal, please.
Well, and I have a lot of questions, but go ahead, Crystal.
Yeah, so I agree with you on so many. This is so difficult for me. This is one of the times where I'm really enjoying having you as a guest, because it's really challenging me to think. And I want to latch on to something you said, that this is something that the founding fathers sort of predicted and tried to put measures in to prevent, which I think it should be, we should really focus on the fact that they did see it coming, which tells me that this is an age-old power structure problem. Anytime you have a bunch of powerful people, they'll do anything they can to stay in power. Whether it was the monarchies or whatever system you put in front of them, they're going to figure out how to game that system. And so at the end of the day, for me, it's always coming back to the voter. Did you do the work to understand these people? And so while I love the idea of no political parties, I'm like, if they're not going to do the work with the political system as it is, like no one does research on candidates right now as they are, I'm not sure they'll do the work when the party system's stripped away either. And I'm like, this is it's the easiest thing and the hardest thing is that the voters really do have to take some responsibility to hold these people in power, because they're not going to stop trying to defend their territory. Anyone that gets in power wants to stay in power. That's just the thing, right? So my question, I guess, I'm curious to hear what you think about, can we have a democracy without an educated public?
Awesome question. Yes. And it's a question that cannot be a yes or a no answer.
Right.
But let's elaborate on that one. Can we have a democracy without educated public? Well, there's a famous saying, isn't it? Ignorance is a bliss. Well, actually, ignorance is not a bliss. Ignorance is basically, well, ignorance is letting other people, giving the power to other people and letting other people to rule us. It is anything but a bliss, because it will come back and bite us. But people are people. We cannot realistically expect everybody to become political philosophers. But I want to draw your attention to another point. We have had money in politics for decades, if not centuries, going back to the Koch brothers. I don't want to embarrass myself in front of a historian, but correct me when I'm drifting off and going wrong. But we had money in politics going back many, many, many years. And like the Henry Fords and Koch brothers and whatever it is, so much money went into education to create not critical thinkers, but to create obedient workers. Through big money through the political parties got their hands on the government levers. And they've passed all these legislations and laws, which, by the way, was mostly drawn up by think tanks who are again supported by this big money outside the government. And then when it comes to Senate, to House of Representatives, to the Senate for voting, the party whipped them to vote for it. And these policies contain loads of loopholes for this political class, this entrenched rich billionaire class, that enabled media concentration, for argument's sake. 5 or 6 corporations owns all the money. Some might be closer to Republicans, some might be closer to the Democratic Party. However, whether the Reds get in power or the Blues get in power, people lose and this elite wins because they have they're financing both parties, not just one. They're financing both parties. So the point I'm making here is this: because they have, through the political parties, managed to capture the media. It's like cancer. The tumor is not contained in one organ. It spreads to other organs, like the media, like the judiciary. So in media decides what we discuss and what we do not discuss. They decide, they put the headlines on, they pick it with the tweezers and say, well, we're going to push this and we're going to just ignore this. So we are debating things that media leads us to debate. But we don't debate, is this system democratic? Have we got right policies? Have we got right immigration policies? It's reduced down to cultural issues. So when it comes, let's not digress too much and come back to your question. Is democracy possible without educated public? I am an optimist and I would like to say yes, it is. And I'll tell you how it is possible. Political parties provide simple cues. It's reduced down to half a dozen things. What is the difference between Democrats and the Republicans? Well, one will say, well, one wants immigration. They're okay with immigration. The other one wants border controls. So on basic cues, one's for a small state. The other one is for private businesses, lower taxes. The other one is for, Democrats are for more public services, more taxation, more spending, kind of a thing. So roughly they've got the cues. That's how they kind of a vote associate with that political party. But we can replicate that with the representatives. If Scott's going to stand for office for my constituency, there could be a government website that puts down top 10 pledges, like a 10 commandments, top 5 pledges. What is his position on abortion? What is his position on immigration? What is his position on taxation? What is his position on foreign policy and wars? Then I will know, as an ignorant, uneducated member of public that has a vote, I will know what Scott stands for. But if I'm a religious person and I'm dead anti-abortion and a candidate is pro-abortion, I'm not going to vote for that candidate. So it's very easy. People don't have to become political philosophers. And this is where we should use a parallel to even make it more crystal clear. The point, the lawyer, none of us are expert in law. If I end up in court, I'm not going to defend myself in front of a judge. I am going to choose a good lawyer to argue my case. So likewise, I don't have to be an expert on politics as a voter. I am going to choose a good representative to look after my interest, not a pro bono that is allocated to me. If the government says, well, you have Mr. A and Mrs. B to choose from, well, none of them are going to be good. None of them are going to represent me. I'm sorry. I want to have a perfect choice. I want freedom to choose. So here, if we have no party democracy, we can choose the best representatives that have our best interest at heart.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, it's possible, but not under the current arrangements, not under the current system, would be my answer.
Well, can I want to go back a bit, because there's a theme that's running through here, and it runs through the book as well, that I think it sort of raises a very interesting chicken and egg issue about which comes first. And I think, again, Madison, again, I'm a huge fan of Federalist number 10, because I really do think he hits on a lot of stuff. But part of his solution is, democracy works best when it's in small groups, right? And so how you keep factions from becoming out of control in a country as big, even in the time, 1789, 88, 89, is that you have a bunch of small democracies that have to constantly struggle against each other, which is part of where you're going with the representative role here in your no party system. But one of the things we're dealing with is this question of centralization, right? And you sort of hint that political parties have accelerated the push towards centralization, particularly in the media, right? I would actually argue the centralization preceded and the parties are picking up stuff. And just a couple brief examples from here that relate to this. So, for instance, Elko County here, little less than 45,000 square kilometers, 17,000 square miles. We're the fourth largest county in the U.S. The federal government owns 73% of the land and has refused to release it to private development, right? If we get rid of parties, we're still stuck with a federal bureaucracy that doesn't want to release this land for various reasons, right? But in this Congressional District 2 race, I think one of the things, and we've talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were looking at these rural electoral issues, Crystal, is this race has really come down to the two leading contenders. I think most people agree. One of them is running almost exclusively on national issues, right? Immigration, border enforcement, fraud, and some of this stuff. The other one is running exclusively on representing the local area, right? That we've got issues with the Bureau of Land Management over land use, water issues, stuff like that. But both are running sort of within a party system, but it's almost like they're not talking to each other because it is focused on centralization, which exists outside of them, right? It might not make sense, but I guess my real question is it the parties that created centralization, or the parties as they currently exist just following a centralization process that had been unleashed, and I would argue has been unleashed since the First World War? I think it really was the First World War that started the path of Western societies towards centralized models. And isn't that the bigger threat?
Where do we start?
Crystal gets on to me all the time about asking questions like this. So
no, that's good. It's good. How do we kind of put this across? Chicken and egg and power. Look, start off with this. We know that if you like, who chooses our leaders? Let's look at that. Do our leaders are really, chosen by the ballot, or are they propelled by the wallet? Mm-hmm. So let's put ballot and wallet together here. When you have millions, if not billions, pouring into presidential elections that sway through the media and so on and so forth, sway the public opinion, I would argue that the wallet speaks louder than the ballot.
Mm-hmm.
And the big money the dark money in American politics. And there's a great book again by Jane Mayer, How Money Influences Politics. A great book that needs to be read. I think she very clearly puts that across, and its history and its impact on politics and how it undermines democracy. In terms of individual reforms, who is in government? The people who are in government are people that money ascends into power. When you come to re-election rate of the incumbents in the United States, it's over 90%, if not 95%.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you step out of the line, you're there for life. You're carried out in a coffin. And that's the power of money. And in the book, I do refer to taxing the donation. Yes, you've got Citizens United case where the Supreme Court had decided you can't stop money, corporations putting money into politics. You'll know the case better than I do. But that's judiciary, respect that. But when companies pollute the environment, we tax them for it. Democracy is a critical infrastructure. So it's supposed to be one person, one vote. But when money speaks louder than the ballot box, then we should tax it. We should tax that influence. So if I'm going to donate $1,000 or $10,000 to your campaign or Crystal's campaign, that's participation. I like your policies and I want to do my civic duty. I want to participate. That's no tax there, none whatsoever. But if I'm going to donate 100 million or a million or 200 million, whatever it is, in some cases we hear 300 million being donated by one particular person. That's not participation. Let's call a spade a spade. That's influence. So that should be taxed. And that tax dollars collected from that should be used to level the playing field for yourselves that haven't got this big money behind them, for the candidates that haven't got all this money behind them. But coming back to your point, again, whether it's the parties that cause the problem or whether it's that centralization. Well, we know. Let's deal with the known factors. The known factors are: it's much easier to capture concentrated power.
Mm-hmm.
If you disperse the power, it's much more difficult to capture it. You capture the party leader, they whip. You've basically captured all the party representatives and senators because you go through the leader and that's it. Rest of them toe the party line. They're told which way to vote. But when you've got 435 independent representatives and 100, I think, senators, it's much more difficult for corruption or to capture that and to get it to work in their benefit rather than the people's benefit. Democracy means power belongs to the people, and those who govern should be accountable to the people. But I'm afraid we don't see that today. So I don't know how much it kind of answers your question, but the problems are with parties is what I'm saying.
Right. Well, and I guess part of what I'm getting to, first of all, I'm sort of really enamored with this idea of taxing political contributions because I think that
blew my mind. I'm like, that's so much.
Oh yeah, that is a very interesting concept, and I can see where that plays out in some interesting ways. But getting back to the centralization, part of what I'm arguing, I think, is that, okay, we have 435 representatives. We might elect one here from Northern Nevada that represents our interest. But at the end of the day, it's still that government in Washington that's controlling whether they're going to release the land, and the other 434 factor into that. So the question, I guess, becomes, and I agree with your idea of dispersing power. I think dispersing power, Madison's absolutely right. That's why you have to do it. But we have a structure where currently in the U.S., I would argue, where that power is not being dispersed to the local level. So whatever we do at the local level doesn't play out regardless of whether it's parties or not. It doesn't play out because the whole structure has been centralized. And
Fair
I
point.
would argue that the party system has sort of evolved to take advantage of that centralization structure. Maybe it's the centralization structure that needs to go, not the parties, at least right now.
Yeah, I partially agree with you on that one, Scott. I would say this, though. Parties are the main reason, as the founding fathers had predicted, for the decay that we're experiencing in democracy. They're not giving us true representation. Look further afield. Now, some people say in US we only have two parties, we need more parties. Well, that will be a disaster. That will be a disaster. We've got it in Netherlands. We've got up to about 20 parties. And guess what? They couldn't form a government, a coalition government, for 7 months. So that brings itself new set of problems. And you look at Israel, they have multi-party system and they set up coalition government. And guess what? Minority partner has so much sway over the party because they do not want to dissolve the government, and they assert disproportional pressure. They get things done in their way rather than the bigger partner. So, more parties is definitely not a solution. It's not a good choice. It might give people more choice, but it's not like the ultimate representative, independent representative for our constituency. Now, for a minute, let's assume that we have got 435 independent representatives, and our representative wants to release that land to the public or to the businesses, whatever the purpose is. Now, because the coalitions are formed on issue by issue, he will have real power, he or she will have a real power to negotiate that with other representatives and say, well, look, yes, I'm going to vote with you on this issue, but I need you to vote with me on this issue. So he or she can work on our behalf. Now, that is not to say that I'm not for decentralization. The power should be localized. I mean, in United Kingdom, here we are only 70 million people, not 350. But we have devolved parliaments for Scotland. We have devolved parliament for Northern Ireland. We have devolved parliament for Wales. So local representation, and you've got the states, in all fairness. So in all honesty, when I've read the Federalist Papers, I could not criticize the founding fathers. I mean, I thought they were geniuses. They were brilliant. They have took the problems that they left behind in England and Europe, and they've refined it to make sure that it was secular and the power belonged to the people to best of their ability, given the tools that they had in the time that they had. So you've really got to have admiration and respect for those guys. Nothing but that. So I don't think they've got many things wrong, in my view.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we can work. Yeah, I think we can work with this constitution and with this setup. But we need to remove party monopoly from representation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, like I said earlier, it kind of blew my mind. I've always had the Citizens United decision as kind of that was the first part where it really started to slide off the rails for America. And, it's like you said, we are voting, but we're voting for the candidates that money pushed to the top. So And you think about it, these are the powerful people's choices. We have to choose among their choice. And it's like, well, that's not democracy. And there is no way to rein back that court ruling. But if we could, and this would be a real kick in the pants, if we could tax like 10-20% of every political donation and that money goes to the opposing side, that would weight down the whole system. That would be so awesome.
But Chris, just Crystal, you're talking about another side. What
No,
I
parade, Scott. I'm trying to enjoy this moment.
no, I'm not rating on it, but I think Matt has got a much more interesting point. And I'll go back because this is one of the things that's always bothered me about the French system. So the French also have multiple parties, but they tend inevitably, it's a cartel de gauche, cartel de droite. It's always a coalition of the left versus coalition of the right in any election, right? But one of the things they do is in an effort to tamp down the influence of money in politics is, television advertising. Every party gets 2.5 minutes in a block that's broadcast after the evening news during the election season. And I always sort of liked that idea. I didn't like the fact they banned it elsewhere because I think there's real problems with that. But I like the fact that opened the door. And I've always thought one of the things that probably should help PBS in this country is, as part of exchange for that federal money, they should open the door to candidates and be required to basically give, the Republican Party, Democratic Party, third party, whatever, whoever's running for office, once they clear the certification with the state, they get 2 minutes every night on PBS. And one of the things that I like about the tax plan is that provides a way to fund that without really choosing winners and losers. You're just funding the infrastructure for more people to talk and participate. Now, I want to hear your response to that. I do have some questions about your solution, but
yeah, no, I agree. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, what is our objective? Our objective is to make sure that democracy functions in the way that it was intended by the founding fathers and in the way that democracy is being defined. And that's power needs to rest with the people. So that is our ultimate objective. So, and any way we can get to that is brilliant. It's fantastic. And taxing and getting subsidized coverage on media, on social media, on mainstream media is a brilliant way of leveling the playing field for the candidates, because we want real, genuine candidates from our locality that are going to represent us, not parachuted in by the party or not being propelled by millions. Because it's what we don't want is to jump from the frying pan into the fire. You've asked me to comment on Nigel Farage's politics here. Now, a lot of people. I don't want to digress too much. You had some questions, but let me just make this point. A lot of people are not happy with our Labour and Conservative parties. They're both equally bad. They have not managed to deal with immigration for decades, after decades. And therefore, people are really fed up with them. And there's, this other guy comes in as a somebody who can rescue the problem, but that's just on paper, because when you look at the substance, he's been funded almost solemnly by one billionaire, crypto billionaire. I think it's Christopher Harbour. Now he has even given £5 million to Nigel Farage on a personal level. Let me ask your viewers this question. If somebody gives you £5 million, which is about $6-7 million personally, are you going to have loyalty to that person or the voter, or the voters, or your constituency? Well, you know who brought you to that level, who provided all that facility for you. So what we want is genuine representation, not people who promises earth and the sky, but then work for another elite group.
No, I think that's an interesting point. Although, in some ways, I think it gets back to the problem about how do you control the money in politics, which I think there's a lot more we need to be doing on that, not just taxes. My personal preference is one of the things that might make this to work is to limit political campaigns to only getting donations from people who live within the circumscription of that campaign, right? So if I'm running, for instance, for a county position, only people in the county should be allowed to donate to my campaign, right? Not anybody from outside. And I think that would tamp some of this down. It's not going to solve the president issue, which is a question I wanted to get to. So reading through your proposal for a no party system, and you've already outlined it, right? That you have local representatives that go on, and then those representatives would put forward and support candidates for the chief executive position, right? And go through this process. The first thing that strikes me, well, two things. First of all, kudos in your shadow cabinet part for recognizing how disastrous in the early American Republic that the runner-up to the president becomes vice president was, right? That was a disaster. That was an absolute disaster for the first 40 years. And in many ways, Yanal Levin in the American Covenant argues that Martin Van Buren's creation of the modern American party system was in large part to stop this thing where you had rivals, each occupying positions of power in the government and going at each other. So your idea that the president, once they get, or presidential nominees, would then select a vice president, I think is a really elegant solution. But here's what my problem is, and it's twofold. First of all, what you've done is instead of a group of party insiders choosing your candidates for president, you now have an institutional oligarchic elite that's choosing it. Even though theoretically they're responsive to the voters, you still have a very narrow group, 435, 535 if we throw the Senate in here somehow, actually choosing who those nominees are going to be. And it strikes me as very reminiscent of how the Senate was actually selected before the 17th Amendment in the U.S., right? Where people elected state legislatures and then the state legislators got together and elected the senators. Now you are adding a popular vote for that. I'm not denying that. But the other question I have, where I think this oligarchic thing is problematic, is I would think there would be a tendency to, though, that oligarchic body, the representatives, the parliament, who's selecting the leaders, I think there's going to be a tendency to select somebody who can work with that body, right? And so I think some people who might support this system would say, well, this would obviously eliminate a President Trump, right? Which is a feature potentially of the system if you're on that side. But in some ways, that same process would also have eliminated a Barack Obama, a Bill Clinton, a Jimmy Carter, potentially even a Reagan. I mean, none of these guys really had deep support within the legislative body. And they had to appeal outside the legislative body and in many cases outside their party structure to get in there. And I think that's particularly important because if we look at Carter, Reagan, and Clinton in particular, all of them come out of governorships. They're governors of states, which one of the peculiarities of the American system is that is the one position that actually provides direct experience with executive power, right? And that's why so many American presidents tend to come out of the governorship, is they bring a skill set that's not found among the sitting legislative bodies. And one of the things that's got me concerned about your system is I would think there was a tendency that the people who come out of that system are the people who could work within the legislature and might actually be less attuned to what the larger public's going on or selecting about.
Interesting point. Yeah, it is an interesting point. Well, let's just kind of unpack that for a bit. The legislature that's being proposed under the no-party democracy is a very different legislature. That legislature will include not the oligarchs, it will include doctors, nurses, business people in that locality. So we will have a very different set of representatives. We certainly will not have the current lifelong career politicians in there. If they don't serve the best interests of the people, people will not elect them. Because very quickly, when you're in the office, you know where your loyalty should lie. You know that if you go against the party, you're not going to have a career there. So the loyalty flows upwards, not outwards to the people. So that is the first point to make. So that will be very different legislature. Now, I am surprised somewhat that you don't enjoy the British Prime Minister question time, where the Prime Minister and the opposition leader exchange all those views and criticism across the bench, debating it for the MPs. Now, obviously, the American system was very different when they've had the vice president becoming opposition leader. Here, it's a very different scenario where one is mandated by the public to become the executive with exactly the same powers. The other, the runner-up, is mandated to scrutinize, only to inform. They've got no power whatsoever, apart from like your minority leader, to go to the independent representatives and say, well, look, on this immigration policy, have you thought before you vote? Have you thought about this? But I think we can solve this problem better with this policy. So it is providing guidance to the independent representatives. Now, another point you've made, if I'm not mistaken, you've made parallels between multi-party system, many parties, that cause chaos, and 435 representatives will be even a bigger chaos. Well, I would argue quite the opposite, and for this reason. When you have parties, you have a machinery, you have a body, you have multiple people that they want to get into power. They want to be, aggregating these different policies and trying to win votes. Compare that to the representatives. There's only one, like the lawyer, there's only one interest they have. They've got to serve their constituency. So on issue by issue, the coalitions will naturally be formed. Like James Madison said, you cannot stop association or freedom of association. We will still have teachers union and this union and the other union. They, and business associations. People will still have the exact same freedoms of association they do today. But what will change is that it will be issue specific, not permanent party machines that lead to government lockdowns not working in the best interest of the country. Now, I want to kind of say this. Patriotism is not loyalty to the party. Patriotism is loyalty to the country. So we should think bigger. We should think outside the box. Now, just have a look at one or two things that democracy have had to overcome. Women's suffrage. Women were not able to vote until 1920. Somewhat 150 years after men. I mean, we've tolerated that for 150 years. It sounds so silly now, but, and I'm sure for those many years, people were saying, no, she belongs to the house. Let her do the cleaning and washing and whatever. We don't want to give them votes, and similar sort of argument could apply here. Because we've been used to party politics, we think there isn't a better alternative. There is.
My point wasn't so much that the 435 representatives are going to be chaotic. It's actually just the opposite. That they're going to unite to pick candidates that serve their interest. as as a legislative body. And I think this might be one of the points where the difference is between the British and American systems might be a bit more difficult, because under the American constitutional system, the president has a whole range of powers.
Of
And
course.
up before Woodrow Wilson in the 20th century, the idea was the president and Congress should be spending their time fighting each other, right? That's where the conflict, it was Wilson who came in and said, no, very much like the British system, the president should be the chief representative of a party. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I think it's an interesting point, and that's why I bring in why governors have been so popular in the U.S. case, is that, again, they are distinct from legislatures in a skill set.
Yeah, no, fair point. It is a fair point, and I concede on that point. However, I need to make this point clear that we're going to have a very different legislature and very diverse legislature, because each and every representative is not going to be Republican or Democrat. They're going to be individual people, and what they will look at is, what is that president going to do for my constituency, for our policies, for what my voters are saying. So at the moment, if you compare it to how the presidential candidates are selected, well, it's by a small number of people. What kind of a proportion of the population is voting for the candidacy? Because for Republican candidates, there was quite a few of them, from Haley to Trump. How did we eliminate those and ended up with Trump? Well, that wasn't the full country yet. The party decided that. So we are now, and that was less than 435 independent representatives that will choose a party that's going to be, a candidate that's going to be commanding broadest support. Now, the party, the president is still elected by the public. Finally, they need to go to the public, and public will decide who they want. But if you look at parties, I mean, some of the arguments are that, well, parties eliminate fringe extremist candidates. They control them, they train leaders and do this and that. Well, all you need to do is look at history. In Germany, Hitler came to power through Nazi Party. And look at what he has done to the world.
Right.
6 million Jews, millions of Russians, Brits, Europeans, and he was through the party system. And through the party system, we've got Erdogan in Turkey crushing the opposition. Through the party system, we've got Putin killing his opponents and staying in power. So all these party politics is a problem. Maybe we don't have enough time for that, but parties come in with all the decay in democracy, and they're being captured either by money or elite or by dictators to portray a democratic face. So that's my problem.
Yeah, and I think it's an issue that this deserves far more conversation. So if anybody wants more information, of course, we're going to have the link to the Breaking Democracy's Chains up on the website. But if they want more information, how to get contact with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, sure. I have a website, metin.pekin.com. Sorry, metinpekin.com, just one dot.
Yeah.
The book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, so other bookshops. So it's widely available if anybody wants to dig deeper into this.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for taking time. I think this has been interesting, and like I said, it filters into a lot of stuff we're going through right now out here, particularly in this very contested CD2 race we have up here in the 775. For those of our regular viewers who want to get hold of us, by all means, shoot us an email at info@775alive.com. But until next time, I'm Scott Gaborski.
I'm Crystal Newton.
And we'll see you around the 775.